Now, I had a chat with Rob Marshall, chief designer at McLaren, just a few minutes before FP1, and he said exactly that. We have added one hanger to the front wing, and they reckon it's going to make no material difference. I asked him how you mitigate the loss of the new technical directive. He looked me square in the eye and said, what loss? So their line at the moment, or their clear communication to us is it will make no difference from the perspective of McLaren, and that right there is the only change they've had to make.
And you can hear Alex Brundle's chat with Rob Marshall in the pre-race show, the build up to the Spanish Grand Prix.
What was that?
Yeah, clearly wasn't cold.
I mean, there was a bit of traffic for Lawson, but drivers do love a whinge, don't they? He's just doing install laps with an aero rake on. There's not a push lap there for Liam, so he's back in the pits again.
What was that?
Yeah, clearly wasn't cold.
Before the radios were broadcast, and then they started coming in, and drivers would start to think there were comedians on the radio. You'd get all sorts of like songs on the radio. You get absolute nonsense. You're thinking, if this wasn't getting broadcast.
Max, can we have diff mid-7, please?
I'm not sure that's what I want, to be honest.
Nice idea. Have another go, says Max Verstappen. So Red Bull trying to balance the car in the early laps there, and that's just a balancing tool, the differential through various phases of the corner, and Max disagreeing with GP. Yeah, some of the stuff that drivers have come out with.
Max, can we have diff mid-7, please?
I'm not sure that's what I want, to be honest.
I mean, do you remember when Lando went out on track? I think it was Mugello, and he was singing. Yeah, on his outlet on his radio, start of the weekend on his radio check. He regretted that. He said he hated that song because it was associated with him for the rest of the year.
Nigel Mansell, back in the 90s and even into the 80s, used to sing on his radio as well. So he'd do that during races. That's not actually something particularly new. Though I do wonder if we need to have a little bit of a throwback to Jolin's racing career to see if he could do different songs and bits of singing. One of the things the teams are doing at the moment, though, with these new front wings, I mentioned it in the pre-show, because in some cases the wings are actually slightly heavier than other cars, because wings are slightly heavier than the old versions, that affects the weight distribution of the car overall. So the teams are just having to learn about these new components, just trying to get the best performance out of them. So it's not just aerodynamic, it's also partly mechanical as well.
Carlos Sainz is getting ready to begin his morning's running. It's Norris, Alonso, Verstappen, Piastri, Stroll, Leclerc, Hamilton, Russell, Antonelli, Yuki Tsunoda. Isaac Hadjar off the back of his career best finish, was the sentence I was attempting, is on the racetrack, a fine P6 in his maiden Monaco Grand Prix. So 4 drivers, little early afternoon quiz, 4 drivers have finished in the points every time they've raced Barcelona. Can you name them? Wow, this is going to be fun. We can have it as a slow burn. Yeah, that's probably going to have to be the case today. Is Carlos Sainz one of them? So Carlos Sainz is one of them, which is quite incredible because he's done 10 Spanish Grand Prix, and every single time he's been in the points, and it's his home race. So what a performance that he's able to provide every time.
Well, somebody who set the world on fire around this circuit, Max Verstappen. I can't remember him having any retirements here.
He hasn't finished in the points every race.
Has he not?
And I can't tell you off the top of my head which race he didn't score the points, but he's not one of the 4. The other one's a niche. Yeah. I'm going to put you out of your misery because I don't think you're going to get them. Okay, go on. Alain Prost. Oh, wow, okay, so this was all time. All time Spanish Grand Prix. Alain Prost. Right. 91 and 93. Michael Andretti. Scored some points in 93. He only had one season. Yeah. Palmer! This is a ridiculous quiz. Who else are we getting out there? Of course, Ralph Furman. 1 year,
Also-
points in Spain. Also had one. Oh my word! The gallery are not happy with the standard of the quiz. I'll tell you that.
Okay, but doesn't it highlight how well Sainz has done to do 10 seasons and always be in the points?
Yeah, incredibly strong stuff from Sainz. If you considered that he began his Formula One career with Toro Rosso, the Red Bull Junior team as well. He's always been mighty around here.
Emulating Prost, Andretti, Furman. Can he get 11 out of 11? He has at least left the garage now to start his weekend, 15 minutes into FP1. They were working on that car quite a long time into the session. I'm surprised because he's not been out on circuit. Normally, if they were all gathered around at the front end, you'd think maybe they were taking off an aero rake or doing something with the mechanics. But a leisurely start, and Carlos is out there. So 16 cars currently circulating. We're finishing a lap with Isaac Hadjar, who doesn't improve.
Okay, let's check in with Lewis Hamilton. His first visit to this racetrack with Ferrari. He's got Isaac Hadjar in the way. And no reaction was heard, but not ideal car placement. Went for a gap disappeared, and we continue on our way.
The thrills of FP1. Drivers on slow laps trying to jostle for position and get into a good window for a fast lap. Of course, you want to wind it up quite early coming out of the final corners because you need to keep building the speed. It's a really long run from the start-finish line as we join Carlos Sainz at that exact point, heading into his first flying lap of the day. So look how long the run is from the start line. It makes the actual Grand Prix start very tricky, as we saw with Norris last year from pole. But it also makes your exit through those final flashing right-handers really critical to start the qualifying lap as well on Saturday.
Alex Brundle wants to make a point about Carlos Sainz. Alex.
Yeah, guys, when the light went green shortly after I was walking back down the pit lane to go and have a look at the McLaren, Sainz still had his headphones on. They looked like they were bleeding the front brakes of the Williams, so that's what held them up getting into the session. So work going on with the nose cone off, and down near the driver's footwell was what appeared to be what was going on with the Williams and Carlos Sainz.
Thank you for the update, Alex. Alex Brundle, two-time Le Mans podium finisher, wandering the pit lane for us on this most consequential of practice Fridays, with so many upgrades being spied down in the pit lane. Now we're completing the lap with Carlos Sainz on the hard tyre as he continues on, and his first effort puts him up into 16th position. Victor Martins, only driver, Sainz's teammate for this session, who does not yet have a time on the board. He's just been doing some basic work with the aero rakes. He's done 5 install laps, but no timed lap. The way it tends to go, you tend to get a softer compounded tyre at the end. This is Martin's first session for Williams in Formula One. He was part of the Alpine Academy for a number of years. Renault before that, before switching this season.
It's a good circuit for FP1 drivers to have a go as well. It is tough, and the high-speed nature of it means that they have to build up and have eyes wide open in the early laps, feeling the speed of a Formula One car, especially if they haven't done too many FP1s. Of course, as I said, Hirakawa's already driven the car a couple of times this year, but Martin's getting a shot as well. Former F3 champion. So Max Verstappen didn't finish in 2017.
Right.
That is why he won the race in 2016.
Fairly famous day in Formula One history.
It was a biggie, but the following year didn't finish. Otherwise, every other year, Verstappen would have been joining the quartet as points in Spain every time.
I can come back at you on this one, Jolyon, because it's F1 the 75th year of Formula One this year. But the Spanish Grand Prix is actually one of those races that goes back before the establishment of the World Championship. Do you know all of the tracks that have hosted the Spanish Grand Prix?
Quiz time on FP1.
Oh man, I feel like the gallery have been waiting to have a chat with us all year long. I think it's going to finally happen after this FP1.
And I'll give you a clue. The majority of them are in 50-kilometre radius of this racetrack.
Well, Jerez isn't.
That's one that isn't.
There is the Valencia Street Circuit, but it was the European Grand Prix.
There was one at Montjuic, is it? was a pretty precarious street circuit around that wonderful part of Barcelona that then hosted the Olympic Games in 1992.
Jarama?
Yeah, there you go. Which is, where is Jarama?
Madrid, isn't it?
Somewhere in the middle, yeah, Madrid.
Have we got him yet?
There's still missing one. It's not a million miles away from this race circuit.
Interesting. We'll try and get it in the time that we throw down to Alex Brundle.
Hello guys, standing next to actually the only unmodified front wing in the field, but I'm going to borrow it for a second just to run through the two other strategies that teams are using against this technical directive. So if you are, for example, Red Bull or Ferrari, they look to be stiffening up these main two planes. So what they're doing is they're using the carbon weave and all of the things that the wing is built of to actually stiffen up the plane and make sure that the wing doesn't flex too much. The second and more interesting mechanism, which Williams are doing, it looks like RB are doing, and several other teams are doing, is actually manipulating the load of the front wing to make sure that it doesn't bend too much. So what they're actually doing is changing the camber of these upper flaps to move the load of the wing towards the central nose, and in doing so actually putting less leverage on the end of the wing furthest away from the nose, and thus the wing flexes less. Now, which is the most efficient solution will depend car by car, but what I will say is the bit where you change the flow of air over this front wing has huge effects on the rest of the car. So those teams who have changed the way that the front wing is loaded in order to meet the regulation set have had to make changes further downstream in order to make that airflow work. It's going to be really interesting to see which of the solutions works better throughout this weekend. Although several of the teams are kind of masking their performance here with us. They're saying, you know, the front wing directive hasn't affected really anything that we're doing. We're just not very quick around Barcelona. So it's going to be really interesting to see in this weekend and also in following weekends which of those strategies proves to be better.
That's the thing. This is a chalk and cheese racetrack to the last one that we've just been at. So a team like Alpine struggled a lot in Monaco. That isn't necessarily indicative of performance in Barcelona. It's closer to Imola in terms of just high-speed performance around here. A team like Racing Bulls were great in Monaco, but they have really good low-speed performance. So if they fall back, it's not necessarily that they've fallen foul of this technical directive. It might just mean that, as they have in recent years, they don't have necessarily the best car in high-speed corners, long-duration corners like this one with Franco Colapinto through turn 9, and then look at turn 10 and into the final sector, how quick and long these corners are. So this is medium speed really at 10, but long all the way through to turn 12 now. Again, long medium speed corner, and then look at these final couple of corners. We can ride on board with Franco. Down the hill, one corner to go. Blend out and squeeze on the gas. To try and take the form book from anywhere else in the season to this one is tricky. And then you have the technical directive on top. I don't think we're going to get the clearest of pictures until we see a few races put together with them, probably.
Flavio Briatore, the executive advisor and acting team principal at Alpine at the moment, watching on. It's Franco Colapinto in the Alpine. He had a big moment making his way up the hill through turn 7 and all over the curb as a result.
That's going to make the engineers wince because the two Alpines have got available to them new floors on those cars. One of the cars, Colapinto, I believe, has the new floor on the car at the moment, but the team weren't sure which floors they were going to put on which cars as they were going into the session. But when Alex Brundle, I know, was chatting to the team before the session started, one of the cars had to have those new parts fitted by regulation. But what they do for the rest of the session, I'm not sure. But I'm pretty sure Colapinto had it on his car at the start of the session.
Colapinto not finding things particularly easy in Monaco a week ago. I will be happy to be back at this circuit and going back up to speed at a circuit where he's had decent form in the junior career as well. Oscar Piastri speaking of decent form, going very, very nicely at the moment. He's looking for an 8th consecutive podium finish. Sam Connors is going to finish off the 2 circuits we couldn't get that have hosted the Spanish Grand Prix.
Pedralbes, which is just a suburb of Barcelona. It was a street circuit that hosted the Spanish Grand Prix in 1951 and 1954. And the one that was pre-war was just south of Barcelona. You actually fly over it and get a great view when you fly into Barcelona Airport. Sitges, a banked oval with almost vertical turns.
I love it. Thank you, Sam. I think we got the gettable ones of the quiz, even if I am marking my own homework. Piastri continuing on. His lead in the World Championship has come down to 3 points in the last Grand Prix.
I had you down as the guy that would dig out Pedralbes somewhere in the archive there.
No.
You don't recall the 1954 Spanish Grand Prix?
No, funnily enough, not off the top of my head. Do like my F1 history, but that one at the very, very beginning of the World Championship. As Piastri comes over the line, and he improves his final sector, and let's see, did he improve his overall lap time? Not quite. So he continues running out there on the hardest tire.
Short lap, 1 minute 15 already that Lando Norris has got himself down to at the top of the times. Aston Martin having a great start to the session. Fernando Alonso obviously up in second, also on the hard tyres. Should clear up the tyres, are also on the other end of the spectrum compared to what we've raced for the last 2 weekends. Triple header, 2 of them have been on the softest of the range. Now we're on to the hardest of the range on what is quite an abrasive circuit. It's a high speed, can have a lot of degradation here. So C1, 2 and 3 for this weekend, and most of the field, as you can see, out on the hards, the C1s. Just Stroll and Colapinto out on the mediums to start. Alonso ticking on nicely, up in second. Stroll 7th, 6/10 to 8. Tiny margins as well usually separate the grid because it's a track everyone knows, and it's quite a short circuit as well. Sector 1 particularly is really just the first corner and a long straight by the time you come through into turn 4. 2 used to be a little bit more of a corner, but the cars have got so much downforce now, you can just drill it through 2 and 3, and you're at the end of the first sector already.
Alex Brondo has a point for us on tyres. Alex.
Yeah, caught up with Mario Isola earlier on in the weekend. We were talking about the change in construction of the tyre between last year. That's how the tyre is built and what it's built of. And he told me that this year the C2 tyre sits much more in the middle of the C1 and the C3 than it has in previous years. So they're much more nicely spaced. Previously, the C1 was sort of out on its own as sort of the hardest, most extreme tyre in the range. Now they feel at Pirelli that the C2 sits in the middle. So that could be an interesting one to watch strategically through this weekend in a race that is typically a two-stopper.
Thank you, Alex. 32 minutes of this opening hour of practice to go. Fernando Alonso continuing to log laps out there. He's at turn 10.
Hold on to your hats. New tyres for George Russell, and he's lighting up the timing screens halfway through FP1. Mediums he's gone on to, as we're starting to see a few other drivers come in for a second set of tyres. Alonso's still pounding around on his aged hard tyres, but George Russell is about to put Mercedes right up towards the top of the times. There we see the timing. The purple sector through the middle, and there we go, bam, half a second clear. We're into the 14s.
Russell, who used the headwind at turn 1 last year for an amazing sweep around the outside to go from 4th on the grid to the lead in 600 metres, as Verstappen and Norris were busy scrapping with themselves.
Can I offer you a little comparison, Alex?
Please do.
Kimi Antonelli out on circuit, also switching from a hard to a medium. Let's see what he can do. Same tyre at the same time. Antonelli, I feel like needing a better weekend on a track that everyone knows, including him, a lot better than recent ones, and he goes 3rd, but 6/10 down on George Russell, of course. It's very early days in the weekend.
Antonelli getting up to speed then. At his first F1 visit to this circuit the drivers know very well. Antonelli racing around here in Formula 2. Victor Martin's out on track earlier on in Formula 2. He does have a lap time on the board now, 1:17.0. Hirakawa has been through the gravel trap so far. That's the hill at turn 7 and 8, which provides a great view of the Formula 1 cars climbing up to turn number 9. Hulkenberg in the Kick Sauber continuing on, scoring the team's only points so far this year, with a really strong drive of experience in Melbourne. He's able to deliver good points for them. He continues on. This team set to become Audi next year, and with the soft tyres he goes just behind George Russell, and he too is in the 1 minute 14s.
Verstappen leaves the pits on softs, as does Leclerc, so we're going to see what Ferrari and Red Bull can do in just a moment. The McLaren's still nestled in the garage. We'll wait to see what they can do on a new set of tyres. Track getting better and better. There we go. Lewis Hamilton now also leaving the pits. So it looks like a soft tyre as well for Lewis. Going early onto a second set of tyres. I think they want to do a long run. That's why they're going for this, and then they'll try and get a preliminary long run for FP1 and make the most of this first hour of running.
Whilst we look at Lewis Hamilton on an outlap, 6-time winner of the Spanish Grand Prix, Sam Collins can talk us through one of the many upgrades down in the pit.
Well, one of the things I wanted to show you to start with, Alex, was actually not an upgrade, but it's the front end of the Racing Bull. And the Racing Bull car, actually, this is it at the previous round, a few rounds ago, actually. And the area I want to show you down here is on the bottom end of the end plate. These metal sections, these are the end of the front wing blades. It's not a particularly exciting arrangement here on the Racing Bull. It's something we've seen quite a few teams do. However, things have changed significantly. Racing Bull arrived at this weekend with a totally different concept in this area. Look at this slot section. The whole bottom piece of the front wing end plate is remote from the section that picks up on the end of the front wing end plate, with these really beautifully sculpted end pieces of each of the upper three wing elements. This is something that reminds me a little bit of what Mercedes tried a few seasons ago and ended up being a little bit controversial. So we'll have to see if any other teams take this route, and there are some other really interesting solutions in this area of cars up and down the grid, including on the car of Charles Leclerc, Alex.
Thank you, Sam. Always appreciate the deep dive into what the teams have brought as we continue the development race all the way through the Formula 1 World Championship. Charles Leclerc with the fastest middle sector of anyone so far. He's on the soft tyres, and Max Verstappen's further back in the lap as well. It's going to give us a good look at the early performance of both the Ferrari and the Red Bull. First over the line goes Charles Leclerc, and he goes to the top of the timing page by half a second. Verstappen next up.
Leclerc not interested in giving his teammate a toe to start his own lap there. Heels immediately out of the way so that Hamilton can find his own air resistance down towards turn one. And that is so important for that first sector time, as Verstappen has the best of anyone. So Leclerc, half a second quicker than Russell, soft to medium. Verstappen is like for like with Leclerc on the tyres, sweeps through the final corner and nudges the time down. 10th and a half, the Red Bull over the Ferrari. And I think this is a good track for Verstappen and Red Bull. I mean, the stats say it has been in the past, but given what we've seen already from this car this year, Jeddah and Imola, circuits with faster corners, this circuit is exactly that. So Red Bull off to a decent start. McLaren now out there on the softs, both drivers starting a push lap.
Yeah, outstanding racetrack for Max Verstappen. 4 times a race winner here, including becoming the youngest ever in F1 history in 2016, and his first ever start for Red Bull Racing. Then for the next 5 years it was Lewis Hamilton town. The last 3 have belonged to Max Verstappen. To Lewis Hamilton then, gyro cam coming round the final corner on the podium here last year, and Hamilton, who has been out-qualified by Charles Leclerc by all but one of the Grand Prix events this year, finds himself 100th of a second back. A good early pace. Here's the man who took pole here last year, 0.3 of a second ahead, is Lando Norris, who has a 1:13.7.
Quickest in all 3 sectors for Norris. Piastri out there at the moment, coming through the final sector, sweeping through 2 corners to go, and we'll see where he can jump in the second McLaren. Norris there with a good margin. This is all like for like. Of course, it's FP1, and there's so much that can change on a conventional race weekend without the sprint and qualifying later today. Piastri only 5th, half a second down.
This has never been on the evidence of only 2 race weekends, but no, it's not been a classic Oscar Piastri track. Last year he was in 10th position. Before that, obviously McLaren not quite as competitive. He was out of the points, down in 13th. So Piastri has won around here in the Junior Championships, but that was in a reverse grid race. So Piastri, having had his points lead trimmed in the last Grand Prix, potentially at one of his weakest circuits of the campaign.
Yeah, both sets of tyres, though, he's been half a second away from Norris in FP1. Will the soft tyres give them any grip for a second flying lap? We see Tsunoda cruising round to try and just get these temperatures down to a temperature that might give them a second attempt. Verstappen's come straight back into the pits in the other Red Bull. Russell actually just did one flying lap on his medium tyres as well. It is a circuit that puts so much energy through the tyres. The left front particularly takes a pounding. Is Yuki going to wind it up? Surely with a lap as slow as this, he's thinking about going for it again. But he's not. Peels straight back in and just did a very, very steady in-lap.
Slightly strange one. Looked for all the world like it was going to be a push, but Japanese driver brings it back. Another driver who had a really torrid time of it in the last Grand Prix, just tootling around, hoping for something to unfold in front that never materialised. But he's back to the Red Bull team at a circuit that he's raced at in Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1, and now Formula 1 for Red Bull as of this weekend. You can hear the pit lane alarm going off when another car enters the control speed. All that noises that you'll be hearing throughout the weekend. Always get questions about that, what the squawk is at this circuit. The squawk is the pit lane alarm as the Japanese driver is back in his team's garage down there. The flurry of activity will begin. P7 for him. Driver trying to find some form. And, trying to bounce back after that non-score. He had a couple of 10th places in Miami and in Imola. So trying to turn the page on Monaco, as many drivers are. Realistically, if you didn't have a good Saturday, you were struggling come Sunday. As we check in with Gabriel Bortoleto, reigning Formula 2 champion, man searching for his first Grand Prix point-scoring finish this weekend.
I think this is quite an important weekend for Tsunoda, actually. He's had a bit of a grace period moving over to Red Bull, having had that decent start at Racing Bulls and the Lawson fallout, the early swap and a lack of pre-season testing. Obviously it's a difficult situation for him to move over. There's been a run of circuits on the calendar as well that are pretty tricky, including Miami, Monaco, Jeddah, and they're punishing. Imola as well was where he had the crash in qualifying, but has been an okay track for him in the past. This one, I think, is a chance to reset. Red Bull may well be quite competitive. It's a circuit that's a bit less punishing than some of those other ones, and that he knows very well. And we're on the back of a triple header, or back-to-back races to make this a triple header. So he'll start to feel how it's going with the team, start to build up that rapport with his race engineer as well, and the team, and the setup, and finding better ways of working. And I think it's about time Tsunoda started putting some results on the board in that second seat.
Do you think anyone can put points on the board in that second seat? It's looking harder and harder to do so.
I think it's possible. But, I mean, you have to rewind this story all the way back, don't you, to Sergio Perez, who ended up having a bit of a dismal season last year. But on its day, could at least be in the top 6. And they've basically ousted Perez, put in Lawson, ousted Lawson, put in Tsunoda. And if Tsunoda in the end is no better than Perez, then what have they done all this for? Just to realise that actually the second car is not very good? On the flip side of this, you've got Max Verstappen in the other car. If you have the best driver in the world in one of the cars, you need someone that's very nearly the best driver in the world in the other car to make it close. Otherwise, if you have a sort of an okay midfielder in the car, they're going to get beaten squarely, aren't they? So it's really, until you see, well, will we see Tsunoda put in some better performances to show what he can do? Maybe. But until you see someone else that might be on a par with Verstappen, you just don't know what that second car is capable of.
I think it's a question of priorities as well. Does Red Bull want to win the Drivers' Championship or the Constructors' Championship? And for them, I think it is a choice between one or the other. I don't think doing both is that easy. McLaren, they're struggling to do both, aren't they? They've got Constructors last year, didn't get the Drivers. You can build a car around Max Verstappen, and he can use that car to win the Drivers' Championship. And he is less sensitive to a really tricky car, or he's more able to deal with a really tricky car than a lot of other drivers. You want your car to be super fast, it does get quite tricky to drive. Other drivers are more sensitive to that sort of stuff, and I think that is an engineering decision. Now, if they wanted to win the Constructors' Championship, say the way McLaren just has, they have to build a car that has a slightly wider operational window, and that's clearly not what Red Bull are doing at the moment. Will they change that for next year? Will they change philosophy and try to design the new car around different driving style? Not sure.
But they're all just trying to build the fastest car, aren't they?
Yes and no. The fastest car, if you designed the fastest possible car, it would be utterly undrivable. Nobody could get behind the wheel and make it good. However, the closer you get to the fastest car, the harder it is to drive. Max Verstappen can go further down that road than anybody else.
Yeah, so the fastest car that a human can drive.
And is Max Verstappen human, the way with his abilities?
Yeah, and so this is always the question about Red Bull, isn't it? Max can take a car beyond what other people maybe can, and that's the skill of him. You know, the feel and finesse that he has behind the wheel. And I mean, still, there's no doubt McLaren are trying to build the fastest car for their two drivers in the same way as Red Bull are trying to build the fastest car for, you could say, their two drivers, but it focuses more on Max as the leading driver. But you know, if Lando was 3/10 quicker than Oscar, McLaren would be naturally leaning on the direction of Lando as well. It's just how Formula One development works. Alpine are going to be taking more of Gasly's feedback than Colapinto's. So naturally the car will start to go in the direction that Gasly reports back, because he's their best chance of success. And it shouldn't mean that the Colapinto can't drive the car. It should just mean that it's the fastest way to build that car. But the Red Bull one is... We've spoken about it for years, haven't we? It's a conundrum there. And I think until you get someone that is a proven front runner jumping into that car, it's very difficult to know if it's an absolute poison chalice or anything else.
Carlos Sainz has been speaking about this. Apologies off the top of my head, I can't remember the media outlet he was speaking to. But he was saying, had a chat with Red Bull. There were reasons that Red Bull didn't want to sign him, but they had that option, and clearly, by the noises he was making in the interview, he was willing to go. But it didn't work out that way. A little bit of politics from the start of his Formula One career and the team he was with, and his teammate across the garage. Either way, they lost that opportunity to have a proven front runner in the second seat, and so Yuki Tsunoda will look and build and try and continue the momentum of the campaign, getting to grips with a new race engineer as well.
And I'm not trying to be disparaging to Yuki, but if Yuki was out of Red Bull at the end of the year, and Ferrari, McLaren and Mercedes both needed a second driver, I don't think they'd be looking to Tsunoda. When you look at the depth they've got across two teams, I mean, Hamilton and Leclerc, you can't replace one of them with Tsunoda. The same with the McLarens. You've got Norris and Piastri. You've got Russell and Antonelli. Okay, Antonelli is still a bit unproven in Formula One, but they have potential champions in both cars, those teams. Whereas I don't see that Red Bull have done that for quite a long time. It suits them. It suits Max. And as you say, Sam, it's about winning the Drivers' Championship, and sometimes going all in the direction of Max can be the help.
Yuki Tsunoda is a Honda driver, and Honda are quite keen to push his career, and it's going to be interesting to see where that goes after next season when the Honda powertrain supply goes to Aston Martin. But this man we're watching right now is a Toyota driver. The Haas team has heavy backing from the Toyota Motor Company through their Gazoo Racing brand, and there's a lot of rumours about what Toyota is going to do in future. Are they going to build an F1 power unit? My information says that is very much on the agenda at Toyota, but nothing is confirmed as yet. However, Hirakawa is being put into all of these sessions to learn, to feed back to Japan about what's going on. But I'm really curious to see how well he goes on these soft tyres, because last time we saw Hirakawa behind the wheel, he gave his teammate a pretty close run for their money. In fact, it was quicker than Gasly, wasn't it?
It was indeed. Let's go downstairs to right about this part of the racetrack that Hirakawa is going past, and Alex Brundle, who's made his way to Williams.
Interesting offshoots down here at Williams. I came down to check on Carlos Sainz's brakes, because obviously they were a little bit late out into the session. What I found actually is it's quite an interesting offshoot of what I think is the front wing change.
And the front lap doesn't look good, to be honest.
heavily front left loaded circuit here. They've been changing the rear edge of these brake ducts down here for Carlos Sainz. Perhaps as a reaction to the change in flow off the new front wing that they have down here at Williams. It looks to be all routine at the moment without further issues like the ones that delayed them into the session, but just really interesting to see the teams having to react all the way down the car to the change of course where the car meets the air right at the front wing.
That's absolutely right, Alex. Like you muck about with a front wing, it does change the airflow all over the rest of the car behind it because the whole car follows the front wing. And that's the floor as well, so that's a really fundamental and big bit of the car to change. And if you discover when your car's out on track for the first time on this new front wing that the floor isn't working quite as well, there's not much you can do about it. You can't just swap on a new floor, though a couple of teams like Sauber and Alpine have done that this weekend, as has Mercedes. But it is a big job to understand what these wings are going to do, because it's not just about how they run in the wind tunnel or in CFD, because as you've already seen on some of the onboard cameras, the wings are still flexing. It's just they're flexing a bit less and maybe in a slightly different way, and that all has an impact on the airflow downstream. So going out on track on this circuit in particular, there's a huge amount of lessons being learned, and I suspect all of this flow-vis die you see on the back of Russell's Mercedes there, what they're really studying there is not the rear wing, although that has changed for this weekend. They're also studying everything and the influences that lead back to the rear wing as well, and I wouldn't be shocked to see a bunch of flow-vis underneath the floor that we can't actually see. So they're studying the impact of all of that airflow coming off those front wings further downstream.
Russell continues to lap, comes across the line and does a time 7 seconds away from Norris's pace. So this is the long run that he's on, and he's done 12 laps on this medium tyre total, including ins and outs and one quali sim lap. And the lap times are just starting to drop away for him. I mean, 7 seconds off the outright pace. Of course, he's now got fuel on board and he's having to drive around with degradation and look after those tyres. But it is it's been a problem for Mercedes, the degradation. He's already come on the radio and said the left front is starting to look bad. And it is going to be some serious learnings Mercedes need to take if they're going to be competitive in this race on Sunday.
You know, I had a bit of bouncing or bottoming entry 9, which was not nice.
Understood, yeah, we can see that Ollie reports something similar.
Yeah, the bouncing through the high-speed corners has been the story of Haas's campaign so far this year. And sometimes the surface allows the car to run low in a window where they can negate that problem. But instantly Hirakawa on the radio saying, not nice, and it's not nice because that's a hugely committed corner of the racetrack.
And this is something Haas, as you say, have been struggling with. In fact, they had such a big problem in Melbourne that they had to rush out a new floor onto the car without giving it a proper development process. They weren't able to put the new floor in the wind tunnel to check it actually worked before bolting it onto the car. For them, luckily enough, it did kind of work and they learned how to tune it. However, I wonder if fitting this new front wing this weekend, that's changed all of the characteristics across the whole car. And I do wonder, are they now triggering their floor issues again and are going to have to go back and start to learn that whole process again? But that's what these free practice sessions are all about. Do you tweak your ride heights? Do you change your setups? Do you just find that sweet spot through the individual cars? But right now, if both drivers are reporting a bit of bouncing from the floor, that is something Haas is going to have to go away and have a look at.
Well, they're another team, a bit like Racing Bulls, that have been really good in low-speed corners so far this year. Do you remember in Melbourne? They rocked up to the first race of the season, locked out the back row of the grid, and Behrman had a particularly horrible run, didn't he, with a couple of incidents. And I spoke to Ayo Komatsu before the race and said, we had no idea we were going to be this bad, because they'd done pre-season testing in Bahrain and hadn't figured out. If the pre-season testing was here, they might have got their head around some of the high-speed performance of the car and tried to understand some of the bouncing a bit earlier. But it does leave them a little bit more on the back foot. I mean, they've improved from Melbourne, where they were certainly struggling with an issue they didn't foresee coming. But now at least they're closer in the window. Behrman's done a decent lap at the moment, up in 7th place. But yeah, different car characteristics. We spoke about it already with the technical directive, muddying the waters. And the fact that this is suddenly such a different circuit again means how much of it is necessarily flexi front wings and how much of it is just inherent car performance on a very different track?
I personally think the front wings, while they're having an effect, obviously, I think this is just normal car development and learning where your car is. Normally when we come into the Spanish Grand Prix here at Barcelona, there are hundreds and hundreds. Everybody basically brings a new car for Barcelona. That's not happened this year, and that's for two reasons. Firstly, this technical directive has changed that sort of bit of the rules, and that means there's a lot of learning to do. And secondly, we're on the third leg of a triple header, which means there's already been 2 races to get through.
Let us know if you need a flap adjust.
I just need the engine going on the straight by the first run.
We're happy to try and strap free if you prefer.
I just don't want to lose 2 tenths every straight.
So Fernando talking about straight line speed, not for the first time in his Formula One career, currently asking for a little bit more power down the straights. He is in P13. Alonso, who used to put in some mesmeric laps around this circuit when the McLaren wasn't quite at full performance, certainly not at the performance it is now. Incredible lap time in a car that wasn't capable of it. He's 7th on the grid here in 2017, is ridiculously good. But he's not happy with the straight line speed he's asked is providing.
Well, remember in the very early laps of the session, he jumped up to the top 3 in the times. So I wonder if Aston were playing around with engine modes to just figure out things very early on, and now they've gone back to a conventional run plan, or if they're trying something now and it's costing Fernando some straight line performance. Either way, he's just settled into 14th behind 13th in fact behind Lance Stroll. So in a way, it's a normal service resume for Aston Martin in the midfield, but Fernando certainly did show a lot more pace at the top of this practice hour. That was on the hard tyres, which is the same as everyone else, basically.
8 minutes to go. Lando Norris is top, then it's Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton ahead of teammate Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri in 5th, Lawson, Behrman, Hadjar, Tsunoda and Gasly, the top 10 at the moment. Hirakawa has been through the gravel at turn 10, but is in P17, having reported bouncing through the high-speed turn number 9. And Victor Martins, who is currently 8th in the Formula 2 Championship. Driver expected to contend for the title. Had a good chance at some serious points last time out in Monaco, before we had one of those F2 first corners. And he is getting his first FP1 of the season. He will go back to Formula 2 qualifying later on today.
So another stat that piqued my interest coming into this weekend, you mentioned the list of winners for the Spanish Grand Prix. This is 10 years since anyone other than Verstappen or Hamilton won the race here.
Yeah, it's mad domination, isn't it?
10 years of either a Hamilton win or a Verstappen win in Barcelona. And then you see the top of the times, and in the first practice, okay, Norris, we know he's good here, and he was pole last year, but then it's Verstappen and Hamilton. And it's one of those things where you put on an old set of shoes and they just fit so well. You jump in here as a driver that really just gels with this place, find the rhythm. They've been coming here so many times, done so many laps, and they're immediately back to being very competitive. And Hamilton, in fact, is 10th and a half up on Charles Leclerc, which he's not found too easy so far this season. There's not been too many sessions that he's come out ahead of Leclerc. He's straight down to a good pace.
Hamilton always excellent around this circuit. 6 times a Spanish Grand Prix winner. And he will hope that he can discover some of the magic of old. After a pretty lonely race, more questions about Hamilton, whose race engineer followed that Grand Prix. Hamilton moved to address that and just diffuse any speculation between him and his race engineer.
You need to check what is going on with the car. Something wrong.
And that's not what Fernando Alonso wants to be reporting, given that he had the mechanical failure in the last Grand Prix, which cost him a chance of his first points-paying position of the season.
So did you know, on top of that, as we see Fernando back in the garage, on top of that, so for the last 10 years, it's been either Verstappen or Hamilton winning the race. Do you know how many different drivers won the 10 years before that in Barcelona?
It would be scattergun, wouldn't it?
10.
Yeah, it would be a lot.
So one decade,
you had all sorts in there.
Yeah, one decade you've got no repeat winners of the Spanish Grand Prix. You've got Maldonado chiming in with a win. You've got Button in the Brawn. You've got Felipe Massa. You've got so many different drivers. Mark Webber in the Red Bull. And then the next decade, only 2 drivers then establish their authority around their circuit. So stats can just play out in these just bizarre ways, and you try and make logic of them, and then actually you realise there's just so much circumstance that leads to these 10-year stats.
You got the Red Bull chasing the Ferrari down the main straight. You just saw Fernando Alonso jump out of the car early, not what he wanted. As he goes racing at his home Grand Prix once again. The driver who transformed Spain's relationship with Formula One ever since he joined the grid. This place that barely sold any tickets really before he turned up, suddenly welcomed thousands through the gates, and they will continue to do so. More fans currently lining this racetrack at the moment than I remember from some Spanish Grand Prix of my childhood in the early 90s. Yuki Tsunoda bailing out of the way. 4 minutes to go. It's Lando Norris top of the pile, and Norris setting a nice early benchmark. His teammates slightly on the back foot. And Max Verstappen there or thereabouts, which we would always expect around this circuit, given that he's the three-time consecutive winner of the Spanish Grand Prix, to go with his maiden win around this circuit. Maiden win in Formula One back in 2016, where he heroically held off Kimi Räikkönen lap after lap after lap to book his place in the history books and begin the process of wrestling the Red Bull team away from Daniel Ricciardo. It's a fascinating dynamic that played out, starting with that Grand Prix. And Verstappen, a 4-time world champion, aiming for a 5th, only 1 win's worth back in terms of the points, 25 points back. But that could easily change. The fact he's kept himself in that contention has been impressive so far this campaign. He's logging the last of his efforts. He's got a couple more laps between him and the end of his early afternoon's work. A couple of hours off to diagnose what they need, and continuing to run long on the soft tyres. We get to the 14th and final corner of the racetrack. Bring it across the line, past the 10,000-seater grandstand on his left-hand side. And Verstappen putting a time up on the board. Got this strange run going on at the moment, hasn't he, Max Verstappen, of being on the podium, off the podium, on the podium, off the podium, which continued in the Monaco Grand Prix.
So he's due a podium
this
weekend. And he should have the car performance to do it again with this circuit. And then it's Canada, which might not suit the Red Bull so much, but we will wait and see. We're getting well ahead of ourselves with that one. So far in this first hour, if you were tuning in and didn't know there was a major technical directive that might have reshaped the pecking order of Formula One in 2025, I don't think you'd know too much different for a practice session. Having said that, if Norris hadn't have done such a good time, maybe you'd think Piastri back in 5th in with Verstappen and the Ferraris is being pegged back a little bit, but Norris showing McLaren still seem to be the team to beat at the moment. Can't read too much, as always, into FP1 time, so it feels like a regular session really, but everyone is just trying to pound round and get laps in. Soft tyres for this long run stint that Piastri's on at the moment. George Russell has done the most laps of anyone. He's going to get over 30 for the session, on 29 right now, just completing his 30th. So it's a busy session, and teams are already learning about the soft tyres, the medium tyres. They ran the hard tyres earlier on as well. The learnings they want to achieve has meant that this has been such a busy session. 17 cars still out there as Piastri brings one of them back in for a late tyre change, and then he'll go on his way for an outlap on a hard tyre and a practice start at the end of the session.
Just looking at the McLaren coming into the pit lane, we've got a nice little view of the cooling outlets on the back of the bodywork. The track temperature at Barcelona right now is 50 degrees centigrade, and in Fahrenheit, that's very hot. And you probably get a good look here. You can see those cooling outlets, the central one and those 2 little gill coolers either side. McLaren notably has quite a lot less cooling than some of the other Mercedes-powered cars. And this car that's just pulled up behind it, the Racing Bull, also has quite a low cooling level, though they have opened it up this weekend. And I think a lot of people are speculating that McLaren have got something quite clever going on in their cooling system inside the car with the layout of their radiators, and have found them a way to make them quite efficient and get cooling for less drag. And that is actually something that's giving them quite a big advantage over some of the other teams.
Interesting point from Sam Collins. I thought Jolyon Palmer was going to jump in there. That's what my pause was. What was your pause, Palmer?
Just the speculation on where McLaren have found performance advantage is endless, isn't it? Every week there's a new idea. This flexi wing was a potential source of McLaren gain. We don't know if it is, and so far it hasn't looked like it's shuffled too much. We hear about the rear brake cooling all the time. Now, you know, bodywork and radiator cooling. And when you have a fast car, everyone else up and down the pit lane is just trying to look at every single aspect to work out how do they do it. Because once we talk about teams' relative performance, and one week Ferrari look good, then Red Bull are good, sometimes Mercedes can be good, McLaren are always the constant, aren't they? If someone is going to take a front row start or a pole position, they're going to have to beat McLaren to get there. It's only FP1, but they still look like they're going to be competitive this weekend.
And this is just riding on board with George Russell. This is one of the factors of F1 at the moment. It used to be that you'd see Ferrari really strong on straight line speed, Red Bull really good in the corners. That seems to have gone away from McLaren in particular. They, just as you say, Jolyon, are strong everywhere, and that's really, really hard to do for any car designer, just to make your car work in all different configurations of track.
And that is FP1. Gone in the blink of an eye. Alex Brundle treading the boards for us down in the pit lane, showing us all the updates he was allowed near. And look at the front wing down there. And then Max Verstappen as second fastest time behind Lando Norris, who's topped the session. Lewis Hamilton in P3 ahead of Charles Leclerc will give him a little bit of joy at the start of his Spanish Grand Prix weekend. But you are looking at the car to beat, using a lot of curve. Using a bit of the painted part of the track as well. I'm not sure I've spotted that line before, but Lando Norris knows that if he keeps one wheel on the racetrack, it's a legal line, and it's currently the line that takes him to the fastest time after the first hour of running. It's the last we'll see of Hirakawa and Martins. Hirakawa back to debrief duty, Martins off to F2 practice, where he will hope to negotiate the session without being clobbered in the pit entry. It's been an extraordinary couple of weekends for F2, and the contact between drivers, they're looking for a clean one at a racetrack that always provides entertainment for F2, and it looks good from an F1 point of view as well on the evidence of the first hour of practice. But as Jolyon says, technical directive or no technical directive, there's still a McLaren out front, and Liam Lawson, after doing a little bit of aero brake work earlier on, finishes in the top 6, something that he will be hoping to continue. Anywhere in the top 10 is a good day for a Racing Bulls driver, and he will bring it back to the main straight for a practice start. In front of the crowd, Fernando Alonso with a lot of support in these parts, as you would expect. It's a lovely artistic look at Lewis Hamilton completing his practice start. Everyone lining up. We'll do it all again in a couple of hours' time. Look at Charles Leclerc, who's never won around these parts. He's taken a pole position back in 2022. And the best sectors, Lando Norris, Sector 1, Lando Norris, Sector 2, and Liam Lawson, Sector 3. Slightly unusual to see Lawson's name at the top of the pile for a sector time. All right, FP1 in the books. We will leave them on the grid with their practice starts and take you through the top 20. Starting with Lando Norris of McLaren, and then it was Max Verstappen for Red Bull Racing, Lewis Hamilton in third position for Ferrari. Next up was Charles Leclerc, then it was Oscar Piastri ahead of Liam Lawson. Oliver Behrman was in 7th position for Haas, then it was Hadjar, after such a strong weekend in Monaco. He was ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, and then Pierre Gasly rounding out the top 10 for Alpine, a second off the ultimate pace. George Russell was in 11th and struggled with a lock-up late on, and it was Stroll in 12th. Alonso, Hulkenberg, Sainz and Bortoleto. And then we had Rio Hirakawa in 17th, Kimi Antonelli in 18th, and it was Victor Martins for Williams, and Franco Colapinto rounded out the field for Alpine. Well, my thanks to Alex, to Sam and to Jolyon. After all the chats of technical directives, it's McLaren who still lead the way, thanks to Lando Norris.